She was wealthy, she was powerful, but in the end she was cursed by name in the Qur'an itself, a fate no one else in history has ever shared. Jamil and her husband, Abu Lahab, thought they could crush the truth, but what they never expected was a divine response that would outlive them for eternity. This is the chilling, untold story of how arrogance led to destruction, and how no one, no matter how powerful, can stand against the will of Allah and win. A woman cursed by Allah and will never make heaven. Watch and subscribe. The sun hung high over the desert city of Mecca, casting golden light upon its bustling streets. Merchants called out their prices, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony of trade. Travelers from distant lands bargained for silks, spices, and precious goods. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the sound of camels braying under the weight of their loads. Amidst this daily spectacle walked a woman whose presence commanded both respect and fear. Jamil, the wife of Abu Lahab. She moved with an air of pride, her fine silk garments flowing behind her as she passed. Her jewelry jingled softly with every step, a reminder of her wealth and status. But behind her expensive clothes and powerful connections, her heart burned with hatred. Hatred for one man, a man who spoke of a truth she refused to accept. It had begun so suddenly. One day the people of Mecca woke up to hear whispers of something strange, something dangerous. A man named Muhammad, one of their own, a man they had once respected, was claiming to be a messenger of Allah. He was calling people away from their gods, away from the idols they had worshipped for generations. Jamil's blood boiled when she first heard it. How dare he? She had watched as her husband, Abu Lahab, returned home in a rage, his face red with fury. He had just come from the valley of Mount Safa, where Muhammad had stood before the Quraysh, calling them to worship one God. "Have you gathered us for this nonsense?" Abu Lahab had roared, throwing dust into the air. "May you perish, Muhammad." The words echoed in Jamil's mind, feeding her hatred. Perish, Muhammad, perish. The idols of Mecca were sacred. They had been there for centuries, bringing wealth and power to her people. Who was this man to challenge everything? Who was he to claim that their gods were powerless? It was an insult, a threat, a war on everything she believed in, and she would not allow it. Jamil was not just any woman. She was the sister of Abu Sufyan, the leader of the powerful Banu Umayyah clan. Her husband, Abu Lahab, was one of the wealthiest men in Mecca. Together, they had influence over the most powerful families in the city. Islam was not just a new belief. It was an attack on their very way of life. If people believed Muhammad's words, the idols would lose their power. The traders who came to Mecca to worship them would stop bringing their riches. The Quraysh, the most powerful tribe, would lose their dominance. And Abu Lahab, his name, once respected, would be forgotten. Jamil clenched her fists. This could not happen. This must not happen. Days turned into weeks, and Muhammad's message did not fade. Instead, it spread. The poor, the weak, the slaves, they listened. They found hope in his words. They believed in his promise that all men were equal, that the rich had no right to oppress the poor, that on the day of judgment, wealth and power would mean nothing. Jamil sneered at them. Fools. But then, something even worse happened. People from powerful families, people who had everything, also began to accept Islam. Among them was Uthman ibn Affan, a nobleman from her own clan, and Abu Bakr, a wealthy merchant. These were not just slaves and beggars. These were men of status. And then came the greatest betrayal. Her own nephew, Ali ibn Abi Talib, accepted Muhammad's message. And the final blow? Hamza, the lion of Quraysh, one of the bravest warriors in Mecca, also joined the Muslims. This was no longer a small problem. This was war. Jamil sat in the grand hall of her home, the flickering light of an oil lamp casting shadows on the walls. Abu Lahab paced before her, his face twisted in anger. "This must end," he growled. "We cannot let him win." Jamil's lips curled into a smirk. "Then we will make him suffer." They gathered with the other chiefs of Mecca, plotting their next move. They declared a boycott, cutting off Muhammad's followers from food, trade, and protection. They forced them to live in exile in a barren valley. For 3 years, the Muslims suffered hunger and pain. But even then, the message did not die. Jamil's fury deepened. She decided to take things into her own hands. If words and hunger could not stop Muhammad, then hatred would. Late at night, while the city of Mecca slept, she walked through the dark alleys, a basket full of thorns in her hands. She reached the paths where she knew Muhammad would walk in the morning. With a wicked smile, she scattered the thorns one by one. The next day, she heard whispers. Muhammad had walked the path, and his feet had bled. Her heart filled with joy. But something strange happened. Instead of cursing her, instead of seeking revenge, he prayed for her. He prayed for her. Jamil's hands trembled with rage. He is weak, she spat. He will give up. But deep inside, a shadow of fear crept into her heart. Because she knew his strength was not in weapons or wealth. It was something else. Something she could not understand. And that terrified her. The revelation that shook the city. Then one day, the sky itself seemed to respond. A message came down, not from men, but from Allah. The words spread through Mecca like wildfire. A new surah had been revealed, one that carried a warning from the heavens. Perish the hands of Abu Lahab, and perish he. Surah Al-Masad 111:1. His wealth will not help him, nor what he earned. 111:2. He will burn in a blazing fire. 111:3. And his wife, the carrier of firewood. 111:4. Around her neck is a rope of twisted fiber. 111:5. Jamil's blood ran cold. Her name, her fate, sealed in the Qur'an forever. She had spent years trying to silence Muhammad. Now her own name would be recited until the end of time, not in honor, but in disgrace. She stormed through the streets, screaming in rage. She would find Muhammad. She would make him pay. But when she reached the Kaaba, something unbelievable happened. She could not see him. She looked everywhere, but it was as if he had disappeared. Allah had made her blind to his presence. Fear gripped her heart. For the first time in her life, Jamil felt powerless, and this was only the beginning of her downfall. The city of Mecca lay in silence, wrapped in the darkness of night. The only sounds were the distant howls of desert winds and the soft whispers of the palm trees swaying in the breeze. Most of the people had retired to their homes, lost in dreams, but not Jamil. She moved like a shadow through the narrow alleyways, her silk garments rustling softly with each step. In her hands, she carried a basket full of sharp desert thorns, thorns so thin and cruel that once they pierced the skin, they buried themselves deep, leaving behind invisible wounds. Her lips curled into a smirk as she approached the path that led to the Kaaba. Muhammad walks this way every morning, she thought. Let's see him preach about mercy with bleeding feet. She knelt down, her fingers trembling with excitement as she scattered the thorns across the ground. With each one she dropped, she imagined the pain it would cause. She imagined him flinching, stopping, gasping in pain. She imagined victory. And then, satisfied, she turned and vanished into the night. Morning comes, but the prophet doesn't fall. The first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. The city began to stir, merchants preparing their stalls, women fetching water, children playing in the dusty streets. Jamil sat in her courtyard, sipping on a cup of sweetened water, waiting. Then she heard the murmurs. He walked through them. The thorns? He didn't stop. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? She snapped at the servant who had brought the news. The girl hesitated before answering. The prophet, he walked through them. He bled, but he didn't stop. He didn't even look down. Jamil's grip tightened around her cup. And? Did he curse me? Did he get angry? The servant lowered her gaze. No, my lady. He prayed for you. The cup in Jamil's hand cracked. A drop of water spilled onto her silk robes, but she didn't even notice. He prayed for her? She had filled his path with pain, and he had asked Allah to guide her. For a moment, a strange feeling flickered inside her chest. Something cold, something uncomfortable. But she crushed it instantly. Weakness. That's all this was. Muhammad would break. He had to. She just needed to push harder. That night she returned. Once again she crept through the silent streets, her basket full of fresh, sharper thorns. She placed them more carefully this time, hiding them between the stones so he wouldn't see them. And again, she waited. Dawn broke. The city awakened. And once more, the whispers came. He walked through them again. He was bleeding, but he didn't even flinch. He never curses her. He only prays. A deep rage boiled in Jamil's chest. Why? Why wasn't he afraid? Why wasn't he broken? Why wasn't he fighting back? She had seen warriors fall from a single wound. She had seen men crumble under pain far less than this. And yet here was Muhammad, still walking, still preaching, still standing. And worst of all, he was still praying for her. She could almost hear him, whispering to the sky, "O Allah, guide my people, for they do not know." Something inside her twisted, something dark, something ugly. She didn't want his prayers. She wanted his suffering. And if thorns weren't enough, she would find another way. The day she lost control. The city was alive with noise as Jamil stormed through the streets. Her hands were clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. This had gone on for too long. She spotted a group of Quraysh elders sitting beneath the shade of a large tent, speaking in hushed voices. At the center of them sat her husband, Abu Lahab. All eyes turned to her as she approached, but she didn't care. "I want Muhammad dead." The words left her lips like poison. A few of the men chuckled, but Abu Lahab's expression darkened. "He is your nephew," he said in a low voice. "He is an insult to our family," she snapped. "To our gods, to our way of life." Abu Lahab studied her, then exhaled slowly. "And what do you suggest, my dear wife?" A smile crept onto her face, cold and cruel. "We humiliate him. We break his spirit. We make him suffer so much that he begs to be left alone." The men around her exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked hesitant. But Abu Lahab, he smiled. And that was all the permission she needed. A woman's rage, a prophet's strength. The days that followed were worse than ever. She followed him in the streets, mocking him, cursing him, throwing filth in his path. She spread lies, twisting his words, turning people against him. She laughed when the foolish children of Mecca threw stones at him. She cheered when the Quraysh called him a liar, a madman, a magician. And through it all, he remained the same, calm, patient, unshaken. And that terrified her more than anything. One evening, after a long day of tormenting him, she returned home exhausted. She stood before the mirror, adjusting the heavy golden necklace around her neck, a symbol of her status, her wealth, her power. Then suddenly a voice echoed through the streets. It was a voice like none other, deep, powerful, unwavering, and the words froze her blood. "Perish the hands of Abu Lahab, and perish he. His wealth will not help him, nor what he earned. He will burn in a blazing fire, and his wife, the carrier of firewood. Around her neck is a rope of twisted fiber." Jamil stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. The gold necklace around her neck suddenly felt heavier, as if it had turned into the very rope the verse spoke of. She felt exposed, doomed, cursed. And for the first time in her life, Jamil felt something she had never known before. The sun hung low over Mecca, casting long shadows across the streets. The marketplace was alive with voices, merchants calling out their prices, camels groaning under their heavy loads, and the constant chatter of people trading news. But today there was a different kind of whisper in the air, one filled with fear and disbelief. Jamil sat beside her husband, Abu Lahab, her golden bracelets clinking as she laughed mockingly. Across from them, a group of Quraysh leaders nodded in agreement, their expressions smug. "So, Muhammad still insists that he is a prophet?" Jamil sneered. "Where are his miracles? Where is his power?" Abu Lahab chuckled. "He is nothing but a madman. Soon people will forget him." But then it happened. A man ran into the gathering, his face pale, his breath ragged. He stumbled forward, his voice shaking. "Something has been revealed. A new surah! The laughter died instantly. The air grew heavy. Jamil's fingers stiffened around her bracelet. What did you say? She demanded. The man swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. A surah, about you and Abu Lahab. A silence fell over the crowd. No one moved. No one breathed. And then he recited it. Perish the hands of Abu Lahab, and perish he. Surah Al-Masad 111:1. His wealth will not help him, nor what he earned. 111:2. He will burn in a blazing fire. 111:3. And his wife, the carrier of firewood. 111:4. Around her neck is a rope of twisted fiber. 111:5. The words struck like thunder. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People exchanged nervous glances. Some stepped away from Abu Lahab and Jamil as if they had suddenly become cursed. A sharp chill ran down Jamil's spine. Her name, in the Qur'an, not in honor, not in praise, in disgrace. She shot to her feet, her face twisted with rage. Where is he? She screamed. No one answered. No one dared. She grabbed a stone from the ground, her fingers gripping it so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She would find him. She would make him bleed. Blind in the presence of truth, she stormed through the streets like a raging storm, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The whispers followed her, growing louder. Allah himself has cursed them. She is doomed. She ignored them. She didn't care. All she wanted was revenge. And then she saw the Kaaba. She knew he would be there. He always was. With fire in her heart, she marched forward, the stone still clutched in her hand. She would find him. She would strike him. She would stop. Her steps faltered. She blinked. The prophet sat near the Kaaba, his presence calm, peaceful, unwavering. But she couldn't see him. Her eyes scanned the area, moving past him again and again. But it was as if he wasn't there. He was sitting right before her, yet her eyes refused to recognize him. Panic bubbled in her chest. She turned sharply to a man standing nearby. Where is he? She demanded. The man frowned. He is right there. Jamil's heart pounded. She could hear his voice, hear his followers speaking with him, but it was as if a veil had been placed over her eyes. Her fingers trembled. She had never felt this before. A shiver crept down her spine. Was this divine punishment? Something inside her whispered, "You are powerless." Her breath came fast and shallow. The stone slipped from her fingers, hitting the ground with a dull thud. She turned and fled, her feet pounding against the earth. But no matter how fast she ran, she could not escape the truth. The words of the Qur'an followed her, etched into eternity, sealing her fate forever. The years passed like sand slipping through fingers. The world changed, but not in the way Abu Lahab and Jamil had hoped. Islam spread. The message of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reached the hearts of the people. The idols of Mecca stood silent and powerless, while the call to worship Allah alone echoed through the streets. The very thing Abu Lahab and Jamil fought against became unstoppable. Their voices, once filled with mockery and arrogance, grew quiet. Their power, once feared, began to fade. And then the punishment came. One evening, Abu Lahab fell ill. At first, it was nothing more than a fever, but soon his skin turned pale, then darkened with rot. His flesh began to decay while he was still breathing. His servants fled. His wealth, which he once clung to so desperately, could not save him. His own family, those who had once sat proudly beside him, left him to die alone. Fear gripped them. They whispered among themselves, "It is a curse, a punishment from Allah." Abu Lahab, the man who once laughed at the prophet's suffering, now lay in filth, begging for water, begging for mercy. None came, and when death finally claimed him, there was no funeral, no mourning, no farewell. His body lay untouched, rotting under the desert sun. Days passed, and still, no one dared to go near it. Finally, strangers, men who wanted nothing to do with him, threw dirt over his corpse, just enough to cover the stench. A man who once walked with pride, now buried like a stray dog. The fate of Jamil, But Abu Lahab's fate was nothing compared to what awaited Jamil. The woman who once stood tall in the streets, mocking and insulting the Prophet, now walked hunched in fear. The whispers had begun. The Qur'an cursed her. She is the woman of the firewood. The rope is waiting. No matter where she went, she felt eyes watching her, voices murmuring behind her back. Her golden necklaces, once a sign of power, now felt like chains around her neck. She tried to act as if nothing had changed. She tried to hold on to her pride, but her nightmares betrayed her. Every night she saw fire. It surrounded her, burning higher and higher. She could hear the crackling of flames, the roar of punishment. And then she felt something tighten around her throat. A rope, not a rope of silk, not a rope of gold, a rope of twisted fiber, digging into her skin, pulling her down into the flames. She woke up gasping for breath, clawing at her neck, but the fire never left her mind. And when her time came, when the angel of death took her soul, her punishment truly began. She once carried thorns to hurt the Prophet. Now she carried her own firewood, fueling the flames of her suffering. She once mocked Allah's messenger. Now she was dragged into the hellfire she had laughed about. She thought she was powerful. She thought she could win. But in the end, Allah had the final word. This is not just a tale of the past. It is a lesson written in eternity. The story of Jamil and Abu Lahab is not just about two people who opposed the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It is a warning, a reminder that power, wealth, and arrogance will never stand against the will of Allah. Wealth that could buy the finest gold, influence that could shake the streets of Mecca, a name that once carried weight among their people. But where are they now? Gone. Their riches could not bribe death. Their status could not stop their disgrace. Their arrogance could not silence the truth. They chose hatred over kindness. They chose pride over humility. They chose falsehood over truth. And in the end, Allah had the final word. Long after Jamil and Abu Lahab were buried and forgotten by the world, their names remained, not in honor, but in disgrace. Surah Al-Masad was revealed when they were alive, and they heard their own doom with their own ears. They could have repented. They could have changed, but they refused. So the punishment became sealed, their fate written forever. Perish the hands of Abu Lahab, and perish he. His wealth will not help him, nor what he earned. He will burn in a blazing fire, and his wife, the carrier of firewood. Around her neck is a rope of twisted fiber. Surah Al-Masad 111, 1-5. These words were recited then, and they are recited now, in mosques, in homes, on the tongues of millions of Muslims across the world. Abu Lahab and Jamil tried to fight the truth, but the truth outlived them. A warning for all time. This is not just their story, it is our story too. Many people today chase wealth, thinking it will save them. Many seek power, believing it will protect them. Many reject the truth, thinking they can silence it. But what did Jamil gain from her hatred? What did Abu Lahab take with him to the grave? Nothing. The only thing they earned was Allah's anger and an eternal punishment. Surah Al-Masad is a reminder that wealth will not save us, power will not protect us, falsehood will never win, and most importantly, no one can fight against Allah and win. So let this story echo in your heart. Let it remind you that in the end, only faith, kindness, and truth will matter. May Allah guide us to His light and protect us from the path of those who earned His anger. All praise belongs to Allah, the most just, the most wise.